Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL wire site that covers your Arizona Cardinals. In our second show of the week, episode 512, with me is Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site, and one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. Is we have another offseason show, the second of the week, where we hit some off-season topics, and then it's mostly Cardinals-centric this time. We don't have a playoff game to talk about. We're not going to talk about the Pro Bowl games. Why?
It's not even a game anymore.
No, it's fun. I mean, I will tune into some of them, or at least the highlights afterwards, because those things are interesting. Buda Baker is, recording on Thursday. Buda Baker is going to be in the dodgeball that's happening Thursday evening, I believe. So about the time we finish this show, Boot will be playing dodgeball, which would be fun. And I didn't know if he was going to make the trip or not, because I hadn't seen him on any of the Pro Bowl games list, but it's good to see that he's there. If you follow the Cardinals social media accounts, apparently this week is dedicated to Buda Baker, probably because of the Pro Bowl games. But let's start off with a topic that's hit close to home for some Cardinals fans. It's not Cardinals related. I mean, it's not Cardinals centric, but it is Cardinals related. And that's because of a billboard that is making waves here in the Valley of the Sun in the Phoenix area, because the law firm Lerner and Rowe bought a billboard. I don't know exactly where that is, but it says, "Let's go, Brock Purdy." Of course, here in Arizona Cardinals country, actively rooting for the quarterback of a team that Cardinals fans hate. There has been talk to being and I have a weekly radio spot on AM 1060, if you guys didn't already know that, because AM 1060 is not a heavily listened to, but I'm on there Wednesday evenings, either 5 or 5:30, usually 5. And Dave Rooster Bierstein, he went off on the idea. He said it is an absolute embarrassment. It is an embarrassment to Cardinals fans for that to be up. It does to me. It goes through. To me, it's kind of an interesting thing, because you kind of have two parts that both make sense, right? And I think both of us see both parts. Obviously, this is a Cardinals town, right? This is a Cardinals town, obviously. And so while there are lots of 49ers fans, they're honestly, you shouldn't publicly root for businesses, education, politicians. None of them should come out and say, "Let's go 49ers." But Brock Purdy went to high school at Perry and Chandler. And so there are lots of fans, football fans, who are high school football fans here, who naturally would root for a guy from here. It's a hometown story. He's playing for the enemy. And so the opinion goes up and down and all over the place. And I understand both parts. But for you, Seth, what is it? What is your biggest takeaway? What is your initial reaction? Are you more disappointed, more angry, or are you just understanding about it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of those people that understands the dynamic of Arizona and Arizona sports fans. And while there are a contingent of incredibly, that basically love Arizona sports and, work or are diehard. The reality is this is still a fairly transient town in terms of sports. The Cardinals are probably the second most popular after the Suns. But we also talked about it like during the World Series run. I mean, you're talking about a sports town that wasn't even really selling out, during their
It depends on
World Series run.
what the fans
Yeah.
believe in. If they believe in you, yeah. But the Diamondbacks, that felt like this isn't real until
Right.
it was real. That's how it was. Basically how it was is because they started so hot, then they played so badly, and they're like, yeah, I don't know if I want to get emotionally invested again because they disappoint. But yeah, Arizona fans here, like Phoenix sports fans, we're fickle as a group.
Well, but it's one of those things too, and I was actually talking to some people about it this weekend because they're from the Midwest, and it was ironic because they're like we're not used to this because our sons played in a baseball tournament this weekend during the Ravens Chiefs game. So like literally during the Ravens Chiefs game, we're at a club baseball tournament, and they're like we're just not used to this because we're from, I think they said Iowa or one of the Midwest states anyways, and they basically said like this doesn't happen in Iowa. Like we don't have baseball, we don't have, or in January we don't have the opportunity
right.
to go do this stuff. And so what ends up happening, and I think what people miss or don't understand is that in Arizona you have a lot of options for your money. And in that case, you don't have, if you don't like the product or don't agree with something about the product, you don't have to support it. So, when people, to your point, are like, hey, this is a local kid, led his team to a state championship, fell short, had a good career at Iowa State. We're gonna support him because the Cardinals aren't in it. It makes sense because you're talking about something in the sense of that what are we objecting to just because it's the 49ers?
Yes, honestly, that really is. It's because it's not just the 49ers. Say Brock Purdy were on the Washington Commanders, and were they in the Super Bowl, I think no one would care.
Yeah, nobody would care.
Nobody would care. It's because it's a division rival. It's because it's the 49ers. And
I think a lot of it is too, because we've talked about this. A lot of it comes down to twofold. One, you're not supposed to get away with the mistakes that they've made. Trading for Jimmy Garoppolo, paying him a boatload of money, and then trading 3 first-round picks to get Trey Lance, and it
have him fail, and it didn't faze them.
And none of it fazed them. And like I said the other night, I think a lot of it too is that they're not. There's a lot of people that are disenchanted with the way that his game is covered. The overlooking the mistakes consistently because the results end up being wins, and it's just like, okay, well, I mean, you can have it both ways. I get that, but at the same time too, you can look at this as a guy that is a very good quarterback, but isn't a game changer, and is benefited by having probably the best offense in the NFL around him. So you can't take anything away from what he's done because he's doing what he's supposed to, but at the same time it's like, if you put a lot of quarterbacks in that situation, they'll be successful. Because remember, I mean, Jimmy G led this team to a Super Bowl with I can't even remember their receivers' names at the time. I mean, George Kittle was definitely their best player, but they had guys like Raheem Mostert. They had guys like
what was the guy? What was Emmanuel Sanders? Right? They had him, and he was like a rando guy on that.
Yeah,
roster.
Emmanuel Sanders. Yeah, their leading rusher that season was
Matt
Raheem
Breida.
Mostert and Matt Breida. Yep, and Tevin Coleman. Remember, they had 3 guys with over 500 yards, and then their leading receiver was Kittle, but number 2 was I think a rookie or second year Deebo Samuel. Rookie Deebo Samuel, and then Emmanuel Sanders and Kendrick Bourne. Like, it's not like we were talking about, what they have now. And so people get, I understand that people get a little perturbed by it. It is what it is. And it's one of those things it's fun to look at, because you're talking about a team that in that time, just made so many errors, but because they were fortunate in some trades, they were fortunate in some ways, moves that they made, that they were successful. I mean, nobody really talks about the fact that they drafted Dante Pettis on day 2 in 2018, and then they had to come back and draft Deebo Samuel on day 2 in 2019 because Pettis was terrible. And so, like, those are the things I think that get to people a lot, is that, and let's be honest, and my buddy's a huge Niners fan, very close to him, and he jokes around. He's like, maybe outside of Raiders fans, there's not a worse bunch. I mean, there's literally fights in every stadium and every game. I mean,
and they still, they talk about the Grand 49ers, and like, I get it, because we still hold on to that title from the Diamondbacks as if it were a few years ago, and it was, 23 years ago. But they're like, all those titles, the 49ers have not won a title in a lot of fans. Yes, Steve Young. Steve Young hasn't been a quarterback in the NFL for a long time. No, I mean, yeah. So, yeah, totally. The Brock Purdy thing, and my wife, I've had this conversation with my wife. My wife is rooting for Purdy and the 49ers because she likes Purdy. She likes Brandon Ayuk from ASU. And I'm like, ew, how can you possibly root for the 49ers?
And it's because she doesn't care.
Right, she doesn't. It's like, the Cardinals stink. They're not in it. Like, let's have something good for him. Like, no, I don't want the 49ers to win. Like,
right.
Ideal situation. Brock Purdy has an okay game. He's not embarrassing. And the Chiefs walk all over them. That would be a perfect scenario.
You also have to remember, too, there's now this, like, crazy portion of fans that dislike the Chiefs because of
Taylor
Travis
Swift.
Kelsey and Taylor Swift. So it's
oh
like,
my gosh. All those 25 seconds of aired screen time that they give her, and there is just a huge new batch of NFL fans. Oh, jeez.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you received that email from CBS Sports, but I mean, the AFC Championship game was the most watched championship game in NFL history. Like, if you don't think that plays into it, you're crazy. And like that, it's a huge deal. And it's not because everybody was rooting for Baltimore. Let's be honest. Like, so yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting. I mean, I'm of the opinion that, like, who cares? But I also understand why people do care. Like, because when you pour so much time and energy into the Cardinals, you want the entire community to kind of fall in line and do the same. And let's be honest, that wouldn't happen in other, in big, if Chicago wouldn't put something up of a guy for the Packers. I mean, and vice versa. The Cowboys wouldn't put something up. If Kyler Murray was on the Eagles and the Eagles made the Super Bowl, there would be no Kyler Murray billboards in Allen, Texas. They wouldn't be, maybe if it was the Cardinals, because they'd be like, hey, it's the Cardinals, who cares? But like, if it was the Eagles, people would just be like, no, you're not allowed to put that up here.
Yeah. Crazy stuff. Coming up next on the Rise Up Zero podcast, the best hour Cardinals talk on the web. We're going to talk about the coaches. The hiring cycle appears to be done. The Cardinals will see a number of brand new coaches in their debuts with their new teams this next year. That's coming up next on Rise Up Red. We're back on the Rise Up Red podcast, the best hour Cardinals talk on the web, with the report that the Washington Commanders, who were the remaining holdout for a team needing a head coach, was hiring Dan Quinn, the guy that I felt was probably a fit in Seattle to go back there. Dan Quinn wraps up the hiring cycle, and so there are 8 new head coaches in the NFL, with only one. No, okay, there's 2 who have former NFL head coaching experience. It's a diverse, this finally, guess what we finally don't have to discuss? The Rooney Rule. Because we have 1, 2, 3, 4 of the 8 coaches are minority hirings. And so,
Well, and you look at it, I mean, obviously Antonio Pierce, right, was kind of, I mean, how does that work? Is it considered a new hire, or they remove the interim tag, however they say it, and that's the thing too. I mean, you look at it, this was a good cycle for coaches, and 2 of the better coaches didn't even get hired, right?
Yeah, yeah. The Vrabel and Belichick are left on the sidelines. What they'll do, who knows? I mean, they're still getting paid, so we're not terribly worried about them. And the Patriots still don't have a general manager. So Belichick say, hey, why don't you bring me back up? Well, I'll be your GM for your Gerard Mayo. But here's the rundown. The Commanders hired Dan Quinn, former defensive coordinator of the Dallas Cowboys. The Seahawks hired Mike Macdonald, and an interesting mix as well, as we noticed, because Dan Quinn, defensive guy. Seattle Seahawks hired Mike Macdonald, the defensive coordinator of the Baltimore Ravens. The Atlanta Falcons hired Raheem Morris, who is the DC for the Rams. The Panthers hired Dave Canales. The Chargers hired Jim Harbaugh. The Titans hire Bengals offensive coordinator Brian Callahan. The Raiders hire Antonio Pierce, a defensive guy. The Patriots hire Gerard May, or promote, I guess. In the Raiders, it was more of a formality, removing the interim tag, making him the permanent head coach. And then the Patriots promoted Gerard Mayo. You've got 1, 2. Now, Canales is an offensive guy, right? If I recall, right?
Yeah, he was the Tampa Bay OC.
Yes, so, yes, right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you've got Jim Harbaugh, who's a former quarterback. So you've got 5 of the 8 defensive head coaches, which is a little bit of a change. But here's what we have. The Cardinals will have 6 games this coming season against 5 of these new head coaches. The Cardinals play the Washington Commanders. Obviously, we don't know their schedule yet, but they will host the Washington Commanders this season. They will host the Los Angeles Chargers. They will host the New England Patriots, and they will host the Seattle Seahawks. And so, obviously, the Cardinals will go against the Mike Macdonald Seahawks twice this season. They'll face Macdonald. They will face Gerard Mayo. They'll face Jim Harbaugh. They'll face Dan Quinn. And then on the road, they'll face Macdonald. And then, of course, they play the Carolina Panthers on the road, so they will also face Dave Canales. What do you think that means for the Cardinals in 2024 when 6 of their 17 games are against new head coaches, which means mostly it means new systems, new, in some cases there's going to be a rebuild. We kind of have to feel like Seattle's going to go in a rebuild situation. We figure there's going to be a new quarterback in Washington, in Atlanta. You have a second-year quarterback in Carolina. You have big question marks about the quarterback position in New England, and so we've got 5 new head coaches, 6 games. What's the impact on the Cardinals?
It'll be interesting because, like you said, there's some intriguing dynamics. Obviously, the Patriots, Mayo's kind of there. They're probably going to have a rookie quarterback or a veteran journeyman quarterback. So the Commanders, I don't know if you saw the post, but it was basically the Spider-Man pointing meme of Ron Rivera, Dan Quinn, same guy, basically. Interesting decision. They beat Arizona last year, though, so you kind of got to just let's see where they're at. The Chargers, you assume they're going to take a step up, but I mean, it's still a first-year guy. They really are poorly constructed. I think they're 52 million in the red, so they have to make some major cuts. They should get some talented players, obviously, with the 5th pick in each round, but you're gonna lose something initially, especially as you get these guys back in, and people pick the Chargers every single year to be to be the team to beat, and it hasn't mattered who the coach is. They've just never lived up to the hype. And so, but Harbaugh is a classic NFL coach. He's done this before. He's reinvented himself and other teams. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because you have to imagine that they're going to be better. Doesn't mean they're going to win, but they're going to be better, right? And then you look at Seattle. Everybody loves Mike Macdonald, but we kind of saw this year you kind of need a year or two to get that in play, to get your guys in place. So we'll see how that plays out itself.
Well, and for me, the McDonald hire is like, which way are they going to go? Are they going to go with, all right, they're going to bring in an established old veteran offensive coordinator, or are they going to let McDonald do what Gannon did, which is, let's bring in a super young coaching staff where practically most of the staff was filled with guys in their position for the very first time.
Right. And so we'll see how that kind of plays itself out. And I went back and looked. Here's the thing about Harbaugh, man. I mean, and obviously it's not in the AFC or in the NFC West, but the Niners under Tom Sula were 6-10 in his last year in 2010. In 2011 they went 13-3. So like he tends to do it pretty quick. He's a good coach. And he's got a guy in Justin Herbert, so he doesn't really have to work too hard. With McDonald, yeah, I mean, what are they going to do? I've seen some names thrown around to be the OC, kind of the Shanahan tree itself. So we'll see where that ends up, if they can find somebody like that, how they go about that. They're going to need some defensive guys, though, if they're going to run what McDonald wants to run. So they're not going to be there in year one. And then you go to the road games, right? I mean, you got Carolina. That's just the unknown. I mean, we've seen what Canales has done in a very effective way with guys like Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield, but man, it's a heavy task to come in and do it with a team that just wasn't very good, right? I mean, they just had
so bad. And then here's the thing. Now you've got your first pick in the draft, guy that you picked last year, and you're giving him a new system in year two. Not ideal.
No, and
that's not ideal.
No, and the one thing I will say, though, is that Canales going from Baker to Young, there are some similarities. I mean, Baker's a little thicker, but just in terms of size and skill set that he can program in right away, right? So he's going to have some solid concepts immediately. But, yeah, I mean, you look at it, it's going to be fun to watch because how that plays out. And I was telling you off the air, what's really interesting to me more than the guys that are new, because it's so unknown, right? You've got the Bears, the Jets, you've got potentially the Vikings, the Dolphins, the Bills, that all,
they could get antsy and
yeah, depending on how.
So, and there's also the possibility, depending on when they fall in the schedule, that any of those guys, like the Jets in particular, or the Bears, where they could be a midseason firing and they're facing an interim, would be
excellent point.
And so there's that. It's kind of an interesting thing there. It does allow, and for me, like in terms of just what it impacts, if the Cardinals can face as many of these new coaches in their new teams earlier in the season than later, I think it gives them a better chance. Obviously, we want to see what the Cardinals do with the roster. I think the more of these new head coaches that you face early in the season, the greater advantage it gives the Cardinals overall.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And, well, let's move on to one other talk. So coming up next on the Rise Up Seaward podcast, best of Cardinals talk on the web, we're going to dip our toes into the draft content. The Senior Bowl is this week, and we had the weigh-in and measurement results for the Senior Bowl. It's not the combine, but we can get some initial questions answered about that. So we'll give some takeaways. Well, that'll be more like Seth giving us takeaways about what to know early on in the draft process from the measurements at the Senior Bowl. That's coming up next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web as we move on. The Shrine Bowl is this evening, Thursday night. You can watch that on NFL Network, or by the time, since this is publishing on Friday, so the Shrine Bowl happened.
Yeah,
it happened, even though it has not happened while we are recording. The Senior Bowl is Saturday in Mobile, Alabama, as it has been, and as what's his name, Nagy likes to say, the draft starts in Mobile. The draft starts at the Senior Bowl, and it is, kind of it is the biggest and perhaps the most important of the college pre-draft bowl games. They weighed and measured. We're going to get the combine later this month, beginning of next as well. But what are some of the takeaways that we get just at the start with some of these? And I know there was one offensive lineman in particular that now there are some questions. You have to really watch the tape. You have to watch what he does in the combine because there's a measurable that came through that isn't ideal.
Yeah, and I think the first thing is we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 guys leave the Senior Bowl today. So they've been measured, but if we talk about these guys, they either left, a lot of them due to injury, but some of them we don't know why. Rasheen Ali, the Marshall running back, Bo Braid, the Maryland safety, Brennan Jackson, the Washington State edge rusher, Malik Mustafa, the safety from Wake Forest, Ricky Pearsall, the wide receiver from Florida, Jackson Power Johnson. Never trust a guy with 3 last names, right? The center from Oregon, and Roman Wilson, who'd been lighting things up, the wide receiver from Michigan. So all of those guys left the Senior Bowl for undisclosed reasons. We know Ali, along with U of A's Jacob Cowing, had to leave because of injury. There's no real information on the rest, so we'll try to get that. Yeah, we'll start with the offensive line, right? And the O-line came in, and there wasn't a whole lot. I mean, there's some interesting ones. One named Kingsley Suamataya, the BYU offensive tackle, 6'4" and 3/8, a stocky 329 pounds, but good arm length, 34 and 2/8 inch, so 34 and a quarter, but they measure it in 2/8. Massive hands, 10 and 3/8 of an inch. So, a big guy all around, a guy that's been getting buzz at the end of round 1. Kind of checks all those boxes that you can start him at right tackle and see if he can hold down the fort. And if not, then you move him inside. The other guy that's been getting a lot of talk at the end of round 1 was Jordan Morgan, the U of A prospect. Morgan's had a ton of snaps in college, 5-year player, I think a 4-year starter, a 5-year player at U of A. He is on the national team, which is being coached by Arizona Cardinals assistant offensive line coach Chris Cook. Came in at 6'4", 312 pounds. He's played over 2,400 snaps at left tackle at U of A. A lot of snaps. But one of the things that came out of this is he came in at 6'4" and 7/8", so just under 6'5", 312 pounds, so, tall, lean frame. But he came in with 32 and 7/8 inch arms. So just a hair under the 33-inch threshold that some people use, and obviously a full inch under the 34-inch threshold that a lot of people use.
This is ideal.
You look at it, Kingsley Suamatia.
Giant hands.
Yeah. Morgan had 10 and 6/8 inch hands. What's interesting is that Morgan's wingspan includes obviously the shoulder, right? And if you're a broad individual, you can have shorter arms but have a big wingspan because obviously you're measuring across. But his wingspan came just a hair under like Talisi Fuaga's, who was 81 and a half. His were 81 and a quarter. So it's not necessarily that he can't do it. It's just some guys are not going to give him the opportunity because of that. One guy's measurements that were insane. Patrick Paul, the Houston offensive tackle, came in at 6'7", 330 pounds with 36 and 2/8 inch arms. So yeah, basically vines attached to his arms. But yeah, I mean, a lot of these guys have had good camps. A guy that has been mocked to the Cardinals at the end of round one, Tyler Guyton, checked all the boxes physically, 6'7", 328, 34 and 2/8 inch arms. So, he kind of measured in where you would want him to be. I mentioned Fuaga. He's on the national team with Coach Cook as well. It's never a for sure thing, but it basically seems like he's played himself out of being in contention for the 27th pick in the draft. In fact, I've seen him now mocked in the top 12 in 2 drafts. So, not ideal. And it's going to bring up, a lot of questions about what the Cardinals do from a philosophical standpoint with the 4th and 27th pick. Sometimes it would almost be easier if Marvin Harrison Jr. wasn't there, right? Because then you're just like, just trade down and then take the best player available at that trade down spot, get a bunch of picks for later. But, the wide receivers, there was one huge red flag measurement, and that was a guy we mentioned a little earlier, Jacob Cowing. He came in at 5'8".
Isn't he listed at 5? What was he listed in college? At 5'11"?
Yeah, 5'10", 5'11". Came in at 5'8", 165 with really short arms, 29 2/8 inch arms, small hands, 9 inches. So we'll have to see.
Which you get on a dude who's 5'8", 165.
Right, exactly. And then the rest of the guys were kind of just all the same. I mean, outside of Xavier Legette and Malachi Corley, both kind of guys that look like they're going to be big slot receivers, over 215. Legette came in at 223. You have a lot of guys in that 5'11" to 6'1" range, that 195 to 205 range. And
a giant in Johnny Wilson.
Yeah, and then Johnny Wilson, who's going to have to move to tight end. I mean, he's a, like you said, a giant, 6'6", 237.
Yeah, he's gonna. You want him to bulk up a little bit, and hopefully he can transition.
Be kind of that move tight end.
Because obviously we'll please see this later. His testing times, I'm guessing at that size, aren't ideal for receivers.
Yeah, what'll be crazy is if he runs anything sub 4.6, he's going to have like a really good profile athletically.
Yeah,
but again, like you said, you're talking Kelvin Benjamin, and like, is that something you want to do? The guy that had been lighting up camp was Roman Wilson. He looked fantastic. Brings up questions about J.J. McCarthy more than it does about Wilson's production. And then, like I said, he left injured, but he came in at 5'10", 186. He just looked uncoverable most of the time. He had a great camp. I know Cardinals fans were looking at big receivers. Obviously Johnny Wilson is the ultimate big receiver, but there's a couple guys that that measured in and then had really good camps. Brendan Rice of USC has looked pretty good.
I mean, it's hard to overlook this is not the only Hall of Fame receiver son in this year's draft.
Right, yeah. And Luke McCaffrey came in at 6'1" and just under 6'2" and 200 pounds. And then the guy that
wait. Is this another McCaffrey?
It is. It's Christian's brother. And
so totally. Yeah. There's some guys.
Yeah, and then the guy that everybody kind of wanted to see came in a little shorter. He was listed at 6'2", came in at 6'1.5". Came in at 197. Devontae Walker out of North Carolina, but again, a big target. He just, he's had an up and down week. I wouldn't say he had a bad week or a good week. He's had up and down week. Obviously, we know corner's a huge thing for the Cardinals and something that they need. And a guy that's basically, again, kind of like Fuaga, played himself out of probably being available at 27's Quinyon Mitchell, the Toledo cornerback. Kind of hit every marker that was needed, size and athletically, 6 foot, 195 pounds, over 31-inch arms. And, he's looked fantastic the entire week. I mean, he's just looked great. But there's been a couple guys that have looked really good that maybe are just a shade under what you want from a size standpoint, but in Jonathan Gannon's cover 3, it may not be a bad thing. Jarvis Brownlee Jr. came in at 5'10.5", 183, but he's got pretty long arms for his size, 31 6/8, so longer arms than Mitchell, who's 2 inches taller than him. And then a guy that I think Cardinals fans would fall in love with if he showed up here, and that's Chris Abrams-Drain. He's from Mizzou. 5'11 3/8, only 173 pounds, but he met that threshold, 31 1/8 arms. But he is like Budda Baker. He is like Jalen Thompson. He is just a guy that loves to hit. Probably a day 2 guy, but someone to keep an eye on. And then a guy that's had a really nice camp that is kind of the intriguing unknown because of, he didn't play great all the time, but he's got everything you want. That's Cam Hart out of Michigan. Almost 6'3", 6'2 7/8, 204 pounds, 32 5/8 arms. And he had a really nice camp. He ended up having a very good camp. We'll see how that turns out in and of itself, but he looked much better. And again, if you're talking about a guy in round 4 and Cam Hart, and you pair him with a guy, and if a guy like Mitchell was there at 27, that would be ideal, right? One guy that's basically, I've seen him actually mocked to the Cardinals in the 2nd round, and I don't know where he fits now, is Kalen King out of Penn State. Do you remember all the offseason love Joey Porter Jr. got last year because of his size? And
yes,
Kalen King is the exact opposite of that. He came in at 5'11" flat, which isn't bad, 190 pounds, tiny hands, 8 5/8 inch, and then a sub 31-inch wingspan at 30 3/8. So short arms, small hands, came in shorter than expected, and hasn't really looked good all Senior Bowl weekend or Senior Bowl week. Unfortunate because, he was a guy that you kind of bantied about whether or not he would be a nice fit at 27. So.
And anyone else of note? Do we need to worry about? Don't need to worry about quarterbacks, and quarterback measurements matter very little except when it's Kyler Murray.
Yeah. There were a couple guys that looked, really good. Where did his name go? Braden Fisk out of Florida State came in at 6'3.5", 295, but he's got short arms, which is always a concern with those guys. The guy out of Baylor, Gabe Hall came in at just under 6'6", 290. So if Jonathan Gannon is interested in staying in that 34, he's a fit, as an edge player. He'll be a nice fit there. Long arms, long wingspan. But the guy that's really taken over, Darius Robinson, 6'5", 286 out of Mizzou. Long arms, 34 and 6/8 inch, and he's basically dominated every drill all of Senior Bowl week.
And with that, this is why I listen to Seth's podcast. Seth and Justin, this is the time of year. If you haven't done it, I'm going to plug it again. This is where I get my draft content, is aside from the other draft contents out there. But I definitely lean on Seth when it comes to that. Make sure you're getting on his show. We will wrap up this edition of the Rise Up Series podcast, the best Cardinals talk on the web, episode 512. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Room. We should be back next week for at least a show, as we've got the Super Bowl to talk about. We've got the Senior Bowl to talk about, as we will start hitting off-season draft and free agency. That's coming up next in the next episodes to go on Rise Up See Red. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.